I'm Edie Lush, and I'm here inside the Hub Culture studio in Davos. You can see there's a lot of activity going on outside. There's a lot of activity here. Been just catching up with Gemma Mortensen. You're the co-founder of More in Common. Tell me first of all what it is.
So it's a new initiative. It's being set up to recognise that we're going through a moment in time in which the forces of social division are very strong. And those are having profound effects on our society and our politics. And our question is how do we respond to that? How do we understand it? And what can we do to do something about it?
So you were set up in the aftermath. You decided to set up in the aftermath of the murder of Jo Cox, who was the MP in the United Kingdom. Tell me that story and why it made you do something about it.
So yeah, there's two origins to More in Common. One was the death of the murder of Jo by a right-wing extremist, as you say, in the run-up to the Brexit referendum. Jo was somebody who cared passionately about the responsibility of countries in the West to act humanely and to stand up for the rights of people in terrible situations of conflict such as that in Syria, and she spoke a lot about it. She was also very, very dedicated to healing the divisions in her own constituency, one in the north of England, which is a profoundly divided community in some ways, but also one in which there has been such incredible efforts by the local community to find ways of living together really harmoniously and really effectively. So Jo's death, I think, was a wake-up call of the cost of what happens if we don't take this seriously. As well as that, her husband Brendan and one of the co-founders, Tim Dixon, had been working on looking at attitudes to the refugee crisis. What was happening across Europe as the refugee crisis hit, and why was it that there was so much fear, really, about a possible influx of immigration, and what did people feel and think about refugees? And what we realised was that something much deeper was going on, that this was about how people were feeling about their own identity, their national identity, their feeling of place and belonging in the countries in which they lived, and also how they felt about the pace of change that they were seeing around them, how they felt about people who are different. So we've been doing a large amount of research in several Western democratic countries really to get to the bottom of this, and that's informed our decisions about what we're going to do from here.
So I'm interested in this idea. You've got a Sustainable Development Goals
I
pin-off.
do, proudly.
And I'm interested in this idea of how we achieve the global goals. We're not going to do it without cooperation. You can't have cooperation without trust. Yet we live in a society in which trust is falling. In the United States, in the Edelman barometer on trust, it's fallen incredibly. People aren't trusting governments. They're not trusting CEOs. They're not trusting celebrities. And really interesting, they're not trusting their friends, people like us, on social media. Experts, there's trust in that. And there's interesting, there's an increase, there's a sort of shift from trust in social media to back to some of the old school journalism. So how does that fit into what you're doing?
So the notion of trust, I think, is very important for two reasons. One of which, people are feeling a profound sense of threat. The threat that we see across the countries that we've studied are the same. It's around cultural change, it's around physical security, it's around economic security. But whereas people previously believed there are institutions that will deal with this threat for me, now they don't believe that that will happen. There's a lack of trust that this will be dealt with. And so there's an exposure to those fears and that threat, which is much, much higher than it previously was. And that makes us as societies vulnerable to populist narratives, because those narratives say, yes, you are right to feel the threat, it is there, but also those people over there who are different from you, whether they're immigrants or Muslims or even the liberal elite, they're the problem. And if you turn against those and you break away with the institutions of the past, that's your solution. And I think the challenge for us all is to say, without trust, as you rightly say, we cannot achieve any of the things that we want to as a global society, but also really importantly as our national societies. And what do the global goals do? They articulate things that everybody, is entitled to, whether that's education or health, or, they obviously are wide and far-ranging. But it's a vision of the future in which the world is better for everyone. But if people don't see that people who are different from them deserve those same things as them, if they don't relate to them as fellow human beings, as equals in some way, or as fellow kind of journeyers, to that common goal, we're not going to get there, because what we're seeing at the moment is the fissures of social division becoming more and more pronounced, and people actually coming into conflict with each other deliberately around identity. And the more that happens, the more we see a race to the bottom. So I think this is, the bigger story we're seeing from our research is to achieve all the things we care about, from climate change to, you know, social redistribution from the 1%, etc., we have to look at the bonds in society and how we see that there's an us here, there's a we, and that takes investment. We need to rebuild that.
So it's interesting you mentioned the kind of bonds between society, because from the research that I've done, there seems to be two ways of building trust, of building community. And one is with people that look like me, so my own family. But then there's this idea of social bridging. So bridging to people that don't look like me, that may eat different food, they may have a different religion, they may have come from a different place quite recently. It takes some time, right? And historically we know that periods of when migration has been an issue have usually been met historically with non-acceptance, and that goes back all the way back in the UK history, right? When the Germans came, it wasn't so great. When the Irish came, it wasn't so great. Same in my other home, the United States. In fact, as recently as the 1950s, people who were getting married from Irish and Italian marriages were considered to be going into a mixed marriage, right? And we've gotten through that. That would be ridiculous to say that today. So given the time that it takes and the kind of bridging we need to make between different communities to make that happen, give me an example of where you've seen it work.
Well, we've been looking a lot into this, because one of the questions we asked ourselves was, if you're part of a strong community that is very similar, so, you know, like the family or whatever, does that make you more predisposed to openness to people who are different? And we don't think that it does. And what we're seeing at the moment is not just a fear of others based on ethnic or racial difference. So, for example, in the case of immigration, people who are perceived to have a different culture, we're seeing a fear of otherness of all kinds. And what happens in a sense, in a situation in which people feel a pronounced sense of threat, is you retreat into that which you feel most secure about. So the bridging bit becomes really, really, really important. And we've looked a lot into, you know, the social contact theory stuff, which talks about the kind of experience that you need to have with people who are different from you for it to actually change your attitudes, your opinions, your behaviours. And that has to be things which is either intense, like you go and you do something intense together and
you're
you
away
bond.
in a camp, or you go away for the weekend, or whatever it is.
Or it has to be routinized. It's something that we come together and we do on a regular basis. So we're looking at the ways in which we can work with institutions that already have people who are different together, the health service, schools, but aren't necessarily thinking about the ways in which you can help people come together across differences. And we're also looking at the kinds of national activations. We ran something last year called the Great Get Together, which brought millions of people across the country together in their local communities. And we're hoping that when we repeat that in June this year, we'll encourage people to find those opportunities to meet people who are a bit different from themselves. I think there's a real desire out there for people to have those experiences, but it's scary. You know, everyone finds
Change is hard.
Change is hard. But when people have those experiences, and in the communities that you see where that's really worked, everyone values the fact of actually having friendships with people who share the same values, who share the same conception of what makes a strong community and a good life, but are, you know, from different places and have different origins. That's something that, you know, we like when we have it.
Gemma, thank you very much for stopping by the Hub Culture Studio here in Davos, and I'm Edie Lush.